Welcome to Protea Conversations, the podcast where leadership in business and accounting isn't just discussed, it's explored. I'm your host, Zane Stevens, and thank you for joining me as we delve into the minds of some of the most influential leaders in the industry. Our journey is one of discovery, from unraveling the unique stories that shaped our guests' careers to the invaluable advice that fueled their success. We're here to provide you with simple, actionable advice to accelerate your career and personal growth. Whether you're a budding professional or a seasoned executive, these conversations are designed to offer insight and perspectives that resonate with everyone. So tune in, engage, and be inspired as we build better leaders together. Welcome to Protea Conversations. Today, I have the great privilege to be joined by Terrell Turner, the founder of Terrell Turner Group, a firm that simplifies accounting and finances for law firms, making these critical areas more useful for business decision-making. Terrell is a New York Times featured CFO and a 40 under 40 CPA, recognized for his ability to take complicated topics and make them simple and actionable. Beyond his work with Terrell Turner Group, Terrell hosts multiple popular podcasts, but specifically the Business Talk Library, where he shares insight and strategies from his extensive experience in Fortune 500 companies and successful small businesses, helping others achieve better financial results. He's also developed a unique process for managing people called the Golden Age of Business, which we'll sure to dive into today. I'm excited to hear more about Terrell's journey, his approach to simplifying finance, and the innovative processes he developed to drive business success. Terrell, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolute privilege. If anybody has ever met Terrell in person, you'll realize that he is probably the nicest person in the accounting industry. He will take time to talk to anybody that comes up to him. He's so patient, even though I can see at times he's running late. And I think the nicest thing he does is he takes an opportunity to talk to me, who's the guy that's hiding in the back corner at most conferences, which I greatly appreciate. The other fact that everybody needs to know, and you'll get to learn this while we get through this conversation, is that Terrell might have the nicest voice to listen to in the accounting industry. Just turn on any of his podcasts, listen to him speak, and you will be enchanted by the smoothness and the silkiness of his voice.
Well, I appreciate the warm and amazing introduction.
You make it really easy. I'm very thankful to be able to call you one of my accounting friends and somebody that I know I can reach out to with questions anytime they pop into my head.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the fun of being in this community is that you really can reach out and we're all figuring out stuff together. And one person may know something that others don't. And I really enjoy being a part of the community and giving back to others that are within the community.
Yeah, community is important, and you really are one of those people out there that is trying to make a difference, which I truly appreciate. I mean, we're obviously all trying to stay in business and be successful as well, but I know that you are really trying to help people. I know you're somebody I can trust, and I know a lot of other people feel the same way about you. So thank you for being that person.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, we're here today to learn a little bit more about Terrell and how you sort of started out in the accounting world and all the way through to your own firm these days and helping many attorneys be successful, which is an interesting niche in itself. But why don't we start with, how did the decision come about to go into the accounting space?
Yeah, so for me, that started probably back in high school where I was trying to figure out, what I wanted to do after high school because most of the people in my family, or many people in my family went into the military, wasn't sure if I wanted to go that route. And then some just went right into working right after high school and no one had ever really went to college. And so I was like, if I'm going to go, what would I go for? Because I don't want to just go for the sake of going because it's an expensive, like whatever kind of trip. So I wanted to be a little bit more strategic about it. And I took 2 bookkeeping courses in high school. And I realized, I was like, man, this stuff makes sense to me. Like it gave me a chance to combine 2 things I really enjoyed, which was math and business. And I was just like, this makes so much sense. And so I decided, hey, when I went to college, I was going to study accounting. And when I got into it, it was one of those things that I kind of figured it out enough to where I didn't really have to study that hard, pass the classes, almost to the point where like I would get like a B+ on the test and like my instructor would call me to their office and be like, Terrell, I know you didn't study on this because you got a B+ I was like, I thought that was good. And they were like, I know you didn't study. I mean, it just became a field for me that accounting just clicked for me.
Yeah.
And I think where it really started to take off was when I started doing internships and I got the chance to actually work doing an accounting job and helping the company that I was working at, helping them actually make decisions by using the accounting information. And for me, that's where I knew like, hey, this is my jam. This is where I want to be.
So, quick question: how does a high school kid find a bookkeeping course?
So I would say fortunate for me, like my high school was testing out this new thing that they call the Academy of Finance. And what they were doing is they were offering business courses to high school students because we had already had like programs like the Future Business Leaders of America. And
Hmm.
so somehow my high school got selected to say, hey, what if we offered a couple of more electives? Because in the American like high school education system, I mean, you get half a semester or a semester of economics, and you get a half a semester or a semester of American government. But other than that, you really didn't get many other practical, courses for like what's going to actually help you in your life after high school. And so, I mean, I was just fortunate that my high school was picked to test out this strategy, in which it worked out great for me because it gave me the opportunity to really explore a profession that I ended up loving.
That's incredible. I mean, I'm constantly pushing for people to like, you know, at a minimum take a bookkeeping course just to help them, business owners. Like, I think if an entrepreneur understands their financials just a little bit, at least allows them to have those conversations with their advisors. Where if you have no sense at all, it's just scary, right? Like, and then it's just daunting. Like, oh, what are they going to tell me about this information because I don't know what it says. So that you're getting the opportunity in high school to be able to do that, I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it was very helpful because it went beyond just your basic economics class, which I'm so glad I had because it gave me a different perspective when I decided to go into college and when I'm like debating about whether you take the extra loans. Like, I remember talking to many students who were like, they were just going to take the maximum amount of loan, even though they didn't need all the money, but they would get a bigger refund check that they could then go spend on other stuff. And because I had gone through accounting class, I'm like, at some point, this loan is going to have to be paid back. Like,
Yeah.
no, let's limit the amount of the debt that I'm taking on, and then I'll just get a part time job to do the other stuff that I wanted to do. And fortunately, by the time I graduated, I mean, I think I only graduated with about maybe $15,000 in debt, just because I like really squeezed it down to where it gave me so many more opportunities after graduating because I didn't have so much debt to try to pay off.
Well, that's the lessons of things that people should learn in high school with the power of compound interest and how much it can really cost you if you just take too much money at the same time. It seems all good and well
Absolutely.
until you have to pay it back and it costs you 10 times as much.
Absolutely. There's many people that I know that, like I said, I graduated in 2007. So, I mean, it's been quite a while, but there are many people I know that are still working to pay down their loans and stuff. And I'm like, for my wife and I, when I think about just our lives financially, like the decisions we've been able to make as far as pursuing the types of jobs we wanted to pursue, or just making the decision to be able to leave a company that we didn't really enjoy working in anymore. It's like we didn't have that burden of like, hey, you have to keep this job because you have student loans, you have this payment, you have this, you have this. It's just being able to make that smart decision for our finances, like when I was, single and just going into college, it allowed me to make some much better career decisions later on down the line. And I think I'm just forever grateful for, that accounting course opening my eyes to how money worked before I started, making those decisions and either getting credit cards. Because in the US, when you go to college, as soon as you get to campus, I mean, I don't know how they get your information, but like credit card applications start showing up. And it's just like, I had enough awareness about money to say, that's probably not a good idea for me.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of not having that student debt, I know us as a family, my wife and I have been able to make decisions that I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have made the same if we had a lot of student debt as well. Being able to get that paid off quickly. I didn't have a ton. I worked as well through college, as well as bursaries and scholarships and all the time. So I didn't have a ton, but not having that does make a big difference. Though I did get caught with credit cards my first year out at KPMG and spent way too much on my credit card the first month. I was like, well, what the heck is going on here? So I got that paid back really quickly, and now I use my credit card as a debit card and pay the full balance off every month. And that, other than earning points, it's nice not to have that debt sitting there earning 25% interest or whatever the credit card company is willing to charge you at this point in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that mindset really prepared me as I went through my accounting career of just, started off in public accounting, working for a big four, and did audit for a few years. And it really wasn't the highest of interest to me, but I appreciated the experience that I was getting at the time of like really being deep in like doing narratives and walkthroughs and doing physical inventories. And it gave me the chance to learn a technical side of accounting that most people don't really learn unless you embrace those types of experiences. And so I was able to use that to then go work for, my first Fortune 500 company. And I was able to move up pretty quickly because not only did I kind of understand accounting, it's just when we would have conversations about the manufacturing processes, like because I had done so many physical inventories, it's like I could work with the engineers and I can work with the production team because I knew the way that material moved through a supply chain. And I was one of the very few accounting people who could actually have that conversation with them. So, like, the opportunity for me to move up in my career, it opened up pretty fast for me because it's like, hey, he's the only one here who understands how to do a value stream map, or he's the only one that understands what a backflush means when you're processing inventory. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would say it was painful getting the experience, but it paid out in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, in South Africa, you pretty much have to go through the audit route. So, spent 3 years of it where I grew up as well, automotive capital. So, a lot of us would sign up for accounts because, well, overtime was great, right? You get the extra pay for it, so why not do it? But in hindsight, like that ability to actually walk with the people who are in the system, they're explaining to you the flow through of that inventory, how it works, how it got into this position, and just listening to those conversations, does make a difference. It allows you to walk into a business and be seen as an operational partner rather than just the accountant trying to bother us for copies of receipts.
And I think that's the way that the entire industry has really transitioned to is how do you become a better business partner? How do you understand the numbers and then use that to help us make better business decisions? And I think unfortunately there were a ton of accountants that I've met that kind of skipped that part of their experience, and now they're having to learn how to back into it when they're like 8, 10 plus years into their career. And at that point, you don't really have as much grace to ask those very simple, or what some people may call like the dumb questions. Like, you don't have as much grace or leeway to be able to ask those questions without it making you look professionally bad. So I do think that getting that experience early on is what really prepared me for how to move through my accounting career and to do, finance leadership roles, where when I worked for companies like General Electric, to be able to take on a finance leadership role for a smaller business that they had purchased, and to be able to do what that entailed as far as like working with the sales team, working with the operations team. And we were going through negotiating like our union contract, so being able to think through what can the business afford as we navigated that. And I think ultimately, like, for that role, my defining moment was we were in the middle of like negotiating our largest contract at the time, and our biggest supplier, who gave us like 70% of our raw materials, had a devastating fire where their factory burned completely down. So we had to rethink our entire business model. And we had to try to convince like customers, hey, we're not going to be able to get you any new products for the next 18 months, but you should still sign these 5-year contracts with us.
Wow.
And so, like, trying to figure all that out, I think, it required me to do more than just know accounting. It required me to know, how does accounting relate to how we're going to make business decisions.
So two thoughts in here. First one, what I take from this is that Terrell is a very curious person, is interested in more than just what's on the surface level of all situations. Does that seem correct?
That would be correct.
And what I would take from that is being curious, like from a young age, let me go figure out what bookkeeping is because I might want to be an accountant, to digging deep into what's happening at the business in terms of not just counting the inventory because we have to count the inventory, but actually asking them about the processes. That feels like those opportunities of being curious have set you up for success.
Yep, I definitely agree. I mean, I think that curiosity has definitely set me up for success, and it's allowed me to avoid a lot of pain as well, because I think it's when you really get a good understanding of being able to look and understand the numbers, and you have that curiosity for figuring out why something works or why something doesn't work, it tends to give you a little bit of insight on how you can avoid, pitfalls that are down the line. And so I would say, I mean, it opened up a lot of opportunities, and it helped me kind of go around some of the roadblocks and the detours, because I could kind of just follow the numbers and the patterns, and that curiosity helped fuel all of that.
So you sort of alluded to this, but how would you sort of inform people to stay curious? Like I think back when I was 22 years old on my first audit, like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, it was easy to ask 100 questions. I'm a lot older than that right now. So how would you advise me to stay curious and still want to learn and understand? Like how do we bring that value into our own lives to make sure we stay curious and continue to learn?
Yeah, I think about it in stages, because I think when you're early into something, whether it's you're early in your career, or maybe you made a career change, if you're early into the learning curve, you're usually asking a lot of questions about the technical side of how things work. And I think as you progress in that learning curve, now what you're trying to figure out is, well, how does all this technical information that I have access to, how does that impact people in their decision making in their everyday life? And I think that's where you start getting into human nature, to where, although, when you're in your career, people expect you to come in and know the technical side, but they don't always expect you to know like the human nature element to what you do. And so I think, when it comes down to staying curious, what I would encourage people is, like, it's one thing to know your technical craft, but it's a completely other thing to get to know the people around you and how your technical knowledge impacts their life. And I think that if you're going into any situation and you're really trying to learn and see the circumstance from other people's perspective, one is it's going to make you very valuable to everyone in the room, and it's going to make you liked and loved by other people in the room, because no one in the room wants to feel like, well, no one understands me, no one sees it from my perspective. Now, a lot of times people may feel that way, but if you can be the person who is seeing it from other people's perspective, you will become like the favorite person in the room. It's like they will not want to make decisions without you being in the room. And I think what that does, it requires you to be curious about other people's perspective on the circumstance, even though you may know your technical skill very well, but what you don't know is how the other people in the room, how they feel and how they look at the situation. And that's just a great opportunity for you to continue learning, because it will only benefit you in the long run.
That's great. So what I'm hearing is do not be scared to ask questions. When you do ask those questions, truly listen and remember that empathy is important because people want to know that you're actually hearing it from their side of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think one of the best questions that, I learned to ask, no matter what space that I've been in. And I remember being in some meetings with one of the division CEOs, within, a Fortune 500 company. And what I noticed is in that room, there were so many people who came in that room ready to give information, but the CEO was the one who was asking the most questions in the room. And it stood out to me because I'm like, there must be something unique about this, because in this room, he's the senior leader in this room, but he's the one that's asking the most questions while other people are coming in there trying to give information, constantly give. I'm like, there must be something to asking those questions. And one of the questions that he would ask a lot that I continually implement myself is when I'm in a meeting or I'm talking to other people, is I ask, how will this situation or this decision, how will it have an impact on you and what you do? Because I think what that does is it makes me curious to learn what motivates other people. It helps me learn what their concerns are. And it also helps me see the situation from their perspective. And I think asking those types of questions is really what allows you to step up to be an exceptional leader.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think what also gives you the opportunities to really understand if they, well, really hear if they understand what you're saying, right? Because if they give you a response that is like totally left field to what you're saying, it's a chance to like recircle around. Let's actually discuss what the solution is. And now explain to me, how do you think that's going to affect that portion? Because a lot of the time, I think we'll get lost in our own conversation. We're not really paying attention. We just heard one little slice of information in the conversation, and it feels like that's going to have this massive negative effect on us, and forget about the other 99% of the conversation that's actually going to have a positive effect on us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the things that really taught me that very well was I took a job assignment to move down to South America. So I lived in Brazil for a year. And one of the things that I would catch myself was after living there for some time, I started, understanding some words in Portuguese. And what I realized is I wouldn't really listen to an entire sentence that someone was saying. Is I was picking out key words in their sentence that I understood and then filling in the rest with what made contextual sense. It was almost like, well, kind of like how an AI works. You give it
Mm-hmm.
a few keywords, and then it fills in the blank. And for the most part, it worked well until you got into some very important conversations where I'm like, no, I actually need to like pay attention to every word that's being said,
Yeah.
because the meaning was completely different from what I was trying to figure out, because I just had such limited exposure in certain situations that I couldn't rely on my assumptions. I had to actually make sure that I was listening and then verify, here's what I think I'm hearing. And it made a huge difference in like my ability to connect with people when I started doing that.
And this is why he's such a great speaker and such a great leader.
Well, thank you.
Well, the other part of it, other than being curious, was sort of, you've gone through your career pretty high level up until General Electric, and there's a lot of great opportunities that you've brought up in that situation. And, some people say that great opportunities just fall in your lap, but I've never really believed that to be true. A lot of it comes from hard work and, putting up your hand in difficult situations. But how did all these good opportunities fall to you? What do you think you did differently to those around you?
Yeah, early on, when I was really working in the very early stages of my career, one of the pieces of advice that I heard from a mentor at the time is he said to me, he said, all right, and he was talking to me in a room full of other finance, professionals who were in a leadership program, and he said it would be very tempting for you to, chase money and chase, the positions and titles, but he was like, my advice to you would be is to chase the experiences. And once you get a good breadth of experience, it's like I can guarantee you the money will come. And so for me, it was just having that perspective of, instead of trying to, chase a title or chase a dollar amount, is to really focus on, you know, going after what types of experience. If I took an inventory of my skill set and I said, okay, all right, what types of gaps do I have in my skill sets? And then how do I fill those gaps? And so one of the things that I took the focus of is, all right, whatever I was doing, my goal was to work hard and be the best at it. And then is to find people who were a little further down the road than me. And then I could have a conversation and say, hey, here's a skill set that I'm trying to develop. Like, I'm trying to get better at communicating financial information to non-finance professionals. And a lot of times, the people that I was, having those conversations with would then recommend, like, hey, this job is open, or hey, here's an opportunity. They may, if they knew the hiring manager, they may reach out and they may, put in a good word for me. And I think by showing that I was, one, willing to aim to be the best at the job that I was currently doing, and showing an interest that, hey, I wanted to be strategic about what I do next, I saw more people coming to my aid to help me land those next positions because they saw those two things. And I think it's just that aspect of being strategic and making sure that you do an amazing job in what you are doing now. And other people saw that and were happy to help me kind of make that next step.
I absolutely love that. That is amazing. Don't chase the title, don't chase the money, chase the experiences. I think all of us need to write that down on a big piece of paper, stick it up on our walls, and start living that as well. There is so much focus in the world that we live in right now to sort of chase the title, chase the money. And the titles and money are important. They do open doors for you. It does make life a lot easier. But it does show that if you're really focused in on the growth mindset, on getting better at what you're doing, and truly have a bigger goal of like, this is where I want my career to go, and then focus on how to get there rather than what that end product is, doors just open up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's one of those things that I tend to look at it from a perspective of like my upbringing, because my father was in the military, grandfather, uncles, one of my older brothers in the military. And one of the things that you learn about being around that environment is in the military, you train constantly for all of these different scenarios. Because when you find yourself in that circumstance, you don't want to be learning for the first time. Like, I mean, my father was a medic in the army, and one of the things that I learned from him was like, you don't want to be learning emergency, medical treatment in the field. You want to practice it and learn it in the practice field and as less of a threatening environment as possible. Because when you find yourself in a war zone and your job is, to bandage people and keep them alive until you can get them back, like, you don't want to be learning for the first time. And it's one of those mentalities that I kept in. It's like, when the risks are low, that is the perfect time to go after the experiences and to learn as much as you can. Because when you get put in a high risk situation, which is one of those things that happened for me, is like, at one company I was at, I worked in investor relations, and it was a $14 billion company at the time, and was a young professional working in investor relations. And we had to explain, some things to the Wall Street analysts, and we're trying to figure out what was the clearest way to explain it. And we're trying to explain warranty accounting. And I was looking at it, and it's like, most people have never really, delved deep into warranty accounting. But I looked at it, I'm like, I understand this. I've done this before. And so, like, I was asked to write out pretty much the script that the CEO of the company was going to read on the earnings call. And I'm like, yeah, you would explain it this way. Here's how it works. And
Yep.
then we talked to the chief accountant, and the chief accounting officer was like, yeah, Terrell's explanation makes perfect sense. Like, this should be the way we talk about it. And it just opened the door to where now the entire senior executive team knew that's the young professional who added a ton of value in a situation where no one else was really ready to step up and do that. And so for me, I credit it to, focusing on getting those experiences early on. When the time came, I was ready to deliver.
Incredible. I mean, warranty accounting is confusing enough to explain to another accountant. I can't imagine like trying to explain it to analysts who really don't care.
Absolutely. I mean, because I feel like in that situation, it's this very high pressure situation at that point, because it's not, hey, we're just having a friendly conversation with people who already understand it. It's like you're talking to people who may or may not understand it, who may or may not care. And depending on what happened to your stock price, they might not be happy with you in that moment. So it's like you are under high pressure talking about a topic that they don't really have interest in, but you do need to explain it because it is part of the explanation as to why the company missed their earnings number this quarter. And so being able to, think and operate under pressure, I think it only comes when you've had experience doing it. Because if that's your first time doing it, you're probably going to give the type of answer that people are going to be like, you're wasting my time with that answer. But you do want to be able to provide an answer where people feel like, okay, I am still highly upset with you, but at least that was a valuable conference. That was a valuable exchange.
Giving bad news is always helpful when you can explain the bad news in a smart, concise way, which sort of makes sense at least. So that always does help. You talk about low risk environments in 2012. You decided to take a jump from low risk to high risk and start your own practice. Tell us about that decision.
Yeah, so I knew that it would be high risk of starting my own practice. And so back in 2012, one of the things that I realized that I wasn't quite ready to just jump in all full speed. So I was like, I'll do some consulting using some of my experience outside of this. And so one of the first consulting jobs that I got was a friend of mine. His father was trying to help a hair care product line come into the US, and they needed a financial model. And at the time, they really didn't have any like historical financials and stuff. And so literally at a 30-minute conversation, some notes I wrote on the back of a napkin, and it was like, turn this into a 5-year, financial model with a P&L balance sheet and cash flow statement. And I remember working like on evenings after I got off my day job of just cranking, like trying to figure this out with some of these assumptions, asking questions and building the model. And I eventually was able to figure it all out, build out the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement for the next 5 years with some interchangeable kind of factors. And then when I called and I presented it to them, they were just like, wow, this makes so much sense. And then within like 2 days, well, no, it was within 2 weeks after I had put the financial model together and the package together, they got a call from L'Oreal in New York, which is like one of the major beauty brands, and was like, hey, we need a presentation on this in New York City in the next 4 days. And so I got on another call, and I was like, okay, all right, let me walk you through how the numbers work and explain it. And I was able to explain it to the COO and get him ready for those meetings. And one of the things L'Oreal said is, when we said, we get a lot of pitches about, beauty brands, but when we saw the level of detail in the financial projections, that's what really made us want to invite you in. And I was just like, wow, you know what? There's something to this skill that I have. And so I just continued to say, all right, you know what? Let me continue to do this on a consulting basis because I wasn't ready to fully, leave my professional career and jump all the way in. But it did start to give me that confidence that I needed, that where, what, I can operate in this high risk environment.
That's an incredible story. I wish my first client was that successful, where I'm able to come in and get them a pitch with this massive company that they're like, gosh, this guy's amazing. That's an absolutely incredible story. Where did it go from then? Like you've got this one great client on your belt. How did you sort of continue to grow the business from?
Well, so I kept it a little quiet in the business front because then that's where I got asked to move down to South America and do a role there. So when I did that, I was like, okay, I wouldn't be able to keep the business, going while I was in South America. Really wanted to just maximize that experience. But then when I eventually came back from South America and I continued to do it kind of partially, and then I realized like the one experience that I really needed was how to raise capital. And so I said, all right, I'll put the business kind of on hold for a little bit and actually look for a job that would put me in a position of raising capital. So I took a position with a startup that was a tech startup that was in the process of, trying to go through scaling and growth. And so I worked there for about a year and a half, and we went through, multiple rounds of, we raised over 100 million in private equity funding. We had acquired two other companies, and then I started building out a finance team. And it was at that point that, getting towards the end of 2019, that I was like, okay, I feel like I have picked up enough of the experiences from all of my career to now say, I'm ready to leave working for someone else and really step into this full time. And so 2019, I made that decision to do it. And then I ended up staying on a couple months with that company just to make sure we finalized and wrapped up the last, chunk of fundraising that we were doing. When they were successful and had all the money in the bank, I'm like, hey, I've reached my moment. And it just so happened that moment was April 1st of 2020. So I ended up starting my firm on April 1st of 2020 when everything was shutting down for the pandemic. And it was just like, all right, it's a great time to start.
Let's really test how good knowledge I've developed over all these years.
Absolutely. I mean, it was definitely I look back on it and I say it was a great experience because it gave me time to really, really focus on the aspects of business that I didn't have exposure to. And that was the marketing and the branding and sales. Because, I mean, in early 2020, you had to be really good at marketing to get anybody to spend any money with you. You had to be good at sales. And that's where I learned how to market, is in an environment where everybody was staying at home. There were so many different things that were pulling people's attention, different things people were worried about and focused on. And it's just like, how do you show up and talk about accounting and finance in a way that's going to catch people's attention and give them the comfort to want to pay you at a time where cash is already tight? And so that's where I learned, marketing and sales for an accounting firm, and learning it in such a harsh environment. I mean, it really taught me to dig deep and be very curious about how this worked and how I could actually use it and do it effectively.
Well, I mean, this is back to those opportunities, right? You keep creating great opportunities for yourself, even though this one was a little outside of your control, but the timing couldn't have been worse, but also couldn't have been better in terms of proving yourself and also showing those people that you're helping that you truly are there to help them in what is some of the toughest times they will probably ever experience.
Absolutely. And it's helped me understand, kind of that journey that we were talking about earlier, where, it wasn't so much about how do I impress them with my technical knowledge of accounting. It was at this point, it was now you have to learn the human impact or the human implications that your knowledge now has. Now, how do you use your knowledge of accounting to help people work through what they're feeling right now? Some people were just distraught because they thought, hey, there's no way in the world my business is going to make it. Or will I have enough money? Or, hey, where do I find money so that we can survive this? And by understanding those emotions, I'm like, I knew how to now take my technical skill set and to present it in a way that could solve those pain points for them. And when I learned how to, combine my technical skill with a strategy to help people overcome their greatest fears or some of their toughest pain points, when I figured out how to do that, that's when like the light bulb went off for me. I was like, this is what marketing is. It's understanding their pain, taking what you have and helping them understand how your solution can help address their pain. And that's where like this whole journey of figuring out the whole process of marketing, what it really means, and how do you do it as an accounting firm. And I would say, I mean, it was a very amazing experience because it seemed overwhelming at the time. Like so many businesses were failing and closing. But for me, it just became this opportunity, like you said, for me to prove to myself that one is I could do this, to have the confidence. And it really came by not focusing so much on what I wanted, but focusing on how can I understand the pain people are feeling, and then how can I help them get over it.
In that moment, though, April 1st, 2020. Were you feeling some regret that that decision had been made?
I will say, I mean, there were mixed emotions because I had just come from working like, 70 to 90-hour work weeks to
Hmm.
where I was just burnt out from doing that cycle of, like I said, raising capital and going through M&A transactions. And I was so burnt out from it that I was relieved to be away from that, but also at the same time thinking like, all right, I just walked away from a salary to a business that can't even afford to pay me.
Hmm.
Um, how are we going to figure this out? And so I would say there was these mixed emotions, like on days that I could actually, go to sleep without a high level of stress. I'm like, I'm glad I made that decision. But then, 2 weeks later, when it would have normally have been payday, it's like, why did I make that decision? And so you're like
Gracious.
constantly bouncing between those two things
Yeah.
until the business started getting some traction.
Yeah. And if anybody hasn't been through a fundraising or an M&A transaction, it is brutal and exhausting because you're
Yeah.
answering the same question 100 times a day because there's different people on those other teams that all want to hear the same answer. So it is never ending and it is exhausting. And I can, every time I finish the deal, I feel like I want to sleep for 2 weeks. So I can see how that sort of helped out to really smooth it over in the beginning of COVID.
And it's one of those things about, when you get into investing at a certain level, like I feel like anytime someone's writing you a check for more than $2 million, you start seeing a lot of the emotion behind it coming in because the person who's writing the check, especially if it's not you know, you know, a wealthy individual who's writing you money from their own bank account. But let's say if it's a fund manager, that fund manager knows like if this doesn't work out, they might be fired. And so their emotions are part of the process to where they're just like this deal better work out. And you start getting to some of the I could say nitpicky details about well how they feel about this, and it's just like that has nothing to do with the mechanics of the business. But
Yeah.
having to navigate that just makes that whole A and fundraising process even more complicated. And I feel like at times I was like, man, I should have gotten like a minor in psychology before I went into business because there's so much emotional stuff that comes up that can derail a deal because there were some deals that didn't go through and it had nothing to do with the business. It had nothing to do with the business model. It was all a very emotional response. And you got to be able to pick yourself up and say, all right, let's go give this presentation again. Even
Yep.
though we gave a flawless presentation, let's just go do it again.
Yeah, it's a tough space, and when I talk to people like in M&A, like they're always saying like the deal will get done when both sides feel uncomfortable. Then you've sort of reached the point of negotiation where everybody should be comfortable.
Yeah.
Because if one side's happy, then there's a problem. Somebody's getting the raw end. At what point did you make the decision to fully niche into law firms?
So that took about maybe a year and a half to 2 years of running the firm because when I first started, it was really whoever would pay us, that's who we would take on as a client.
Hmm.
And I think eventually you learn that it's probably not the best strategy to use when you're trying to build anything that is scalable and sustainable. And I recognized the toll that it had on, the few people I had on the team at the time by like trying to change industries where there were some mistakes that were getting through in our accounting and bookkeeping process. So I was like, okay, all right, yeah, we cannot build a sustainable, accounting firm if we have these type of mistakes, and we just didn't have enough people to really cover all the industries that we were touching. So I started really looking at, okay, all right, what could be a better way for us to approach this? And I had heard for a while from a marketing perspective is, if you're very clear about who your audience is, it makes your marketing a lot easier. I was like, well, what if we actually tried that, from our client services? And once we really started narrowing in our focus, I saw a lot of improvement for my staff because they were seeing some of the same things over and over to where they were able to catch things before, I had to review them because they just had that repetition. And once we had solidified enough of a reputation or repetition for the team to get comfortable, then I was like, all right, we're ready to go big and really market and brand like, here's what we do. We do bookkeeping and CFO services for law firms. Now, we still have some non law firm clients, but that was what we went very big with because it was the right decision as a team and as a business to really focus.
Yeah, we sort of followed the same journey in the beginning as well. We sort of helped whoever came to our door, and especially my business partners, they had a friend, we'd go help them, whatever, no problem. But the same thing, realized, from a process standpoint, it became really difficult to have one person that has 6 different industries on their 6 clients, and they weren't doing any of them very, very well. I guess it's that like adage that if you're trying to please everybody, you probably won't please anybody type approach because you don't have the depth of knowledge. You can't add the insight, which I think more and more it's becoming important as accountants. We can't just do compliance. We have to provide some sort of insight to show our value, right? So sort of followed the same process. And I love that you speak about how it made it life easier for your team, which I think is a great segue into this great method that you're using to manage your team, being the golden age of business. Would you like to take a couple of minutes to just elaborate on what that is?
Yeah, so I would say probably about 2 years ago, I was doing performance reviews with a couple of staff members that we had, and we had this awkward moment where I let them rate themselves, and then I read what they rated themselves, and then I rate them. And what I realized is, the 2 staff members that I had on the accounting team, they rated themselves as all 5, but 1 out of 5. And I was like, that's not quite how I see it. And I realized in that moment, this wasn't their fault. This was my fault because clearly I didn't make it clear to them what, excellent expectations were. And so they rated themselves a 5 out of 5 because they felt like, hey, they were working really hard. And as I had a conversation with them to understand why they felt like they were a 5 out of 5, and they explained, and what I realized a lot of what they were saying had to do with they were working really hard. They were like, they worked on this, they worked on this. And then I realized like, well, doesn't really that really isn't that important or a priority when it comes to the job that you do for the team. And I realized like I didn't do a good job of connecting the dots for them. And so I started this research on like, how do you, set goals that are relevant for the team, but also give them some room for growth and opportunity. And so as I was thinking through it, several months of thinking about this and, trying different approaches as I would map it out. And I eventually mapped out like, okay, if you're putting in average effort, here's what that performance will look like. If you're putting in good effort, here's what that performance will look like. If you're putting in excellent effort, here's what that performance will look like. And then I was talking to a friend about it and just kind of explaining it to him. And a friend came back and said, "Oh, it's like, your age goal." I was like, "Age goal? What are you talking about?" They were like, "Average, good, excellent." I was like, "Oh, AGE." I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." And, we kind of thought about a name for the process because a couple of other accounting firms that I talked to, they were like, "Man, that's really good. Like, do you have a framework that like you can help us with on this?" And I was like, "Well, no, I mean, it was actually something I was just doing internally." And so I realized there was this big need for developing this framework. And so we came back and we called it the golden age of business. Well, actually, we called it the golden age of talent management. But since I would say in the past 6 months, we've actually taken a step back and looked at everything that we do in our business. And we realized this golden age framework was actually showing up in every area how we were operating our business. And so we took a step back and since in the last 6 months, we created what we call this framework called the golden age of business. And it is really of helping you really look at a part of your business and defining what does average look like, what does good look like, what does excellent look like? Because what we found is by being able to paint that very clear picture, your staff or even myself, when I create those goals for myself, it's like it gave me so much more clarity that figuring out how to prioritize my time and what I invested my energy in became so much easier because it's like it was almost like I had a roadmap of how to go from, average performance up to excellent. And when we started working with our team on it, what we noticed is that our team had way more clarity and our team was able to spend less time doing the things that didn't really matter. And they spent more time doing the things that really added value to the rest of the team and added value to the clients. Plus, now that they had that roadmap of what average, good, and excellent looked like, they actually started getting more creative on how they could become more efficient and more effective with their job. Because before, in order for them to get more efficient and effective, they were waiting on me to give them feedback because they didn't know what a better performance looked like. But the golden age just gave us that chance to really create that clear picture. And then what we did is we took the time to say, okay, all right, all of the goals, their average, their good, their excellent goals are all aligned to the company's overall goals. So no matter where they're working, it's always helping the overall company and their individual performance get better. And when we realized, that it worked so well, and I did some more research, and I realized there was a whole lot of neuroscience and that went into this and cognitive behavior, like going back to all of that psychology that I wish I studied. Like
Mhm.
I actually did start studying it and realized the golden age method has all of that built into it. So it really helped our performance improve in a dramatic way.
Yeah, it's really good. I attended a presentation that Terrell gave explaining the golden age of business at scaling new heights, and it was extremely insightful. What I like the most about it is I think we always get stuck with goals between like success and failure. And, this is why New Year's resolutions don't work, right? Because failure happens so quickly. But having the structure of average, good, and excellent means that even if you're just reaching a certain point, there is some success that you've achieved, and there's no point where it's just like, oh, it's win or lose, right? Like, no, there's some scales within this, and it gives you an opportunity to keep pushing for that excellent, which keeps driving you forward, which I think it's a really good way. I've taken a lot of lessons from it. I've looked at the notes again, and I've made some adjustments internally, and I will be making even further adjustments for my team if when they're listening for our goal setting for next year, taking into account some of the ideas that Terrell has shared in the golden age of business. So great, great system. And I think everybody should take some time. If you're an accountant, wherever Terrell's speaking, go listen to him. It's totally worth it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's something that my wife and I, when we really looked at what we were doing internally, we realized like how valuable it was for our team to where we even started a new podcast called The Golden Age of Business, where we walk through, each month we're walking through how the golden age of business applies to a different area of your business. Like last weekend, we were recording the episode on how you can use the golden age framework to apply to your marketing. And then we'll talk about how do you use it, how it applies to sales, how it applies to setting team goals, and how it applies to finance. Because when we were going through it and how the golden age, framework applies to finance, what it actually did is in that process, we actually developed a new service line of business that we could now sell to our clients. Because by just going through that process, we realized like, hey, here's a new framework that we can now actually sell to more businesses and to help more businesses. And it came by just going through that framework internally to where it's like another light bulb moment came to where it's like now we have a new way to add value to our clients, plus to bring more revenue into the firm.
Incredible. So, Terrell, you run a business, you've got multiple podcasts happening, you're speaker extraordinaire. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what does a normal day look like for Terrell?
So I would say for me, a normal day definitely starts off with really figuring out, what's the overall vision and really focusing on like, am I making that picture clear for myself? And then am I making it clear for the team? Because what I realize is my days of being deep in the details on every client, that those days are gone. To where we have a amazing team. Now we have a team of a total of 8 members on our team. So we have an amazing team, and my job is really how do I paint the picture of the journey that we're on, and then also understand what roadblocks may be stopping anyone on the team from being able to be as successful as possible. And then how do I work with them to move those roadblocks out of the way? And so I would say like, for example, like today, one of my goals or how my day looked is, woke up, I'm working on the golden age framework in different parts of the business where I'm writing out ideas and kind of writing out that framework to better help introduce it to more of our staff as I'm going through some of our internal processes and how do I make them more efficient. And then there's some calls with clients where I do still take calls with clients where we're digging in and I'm spending that time to really understand what's the real pain point for the client. And then I go back to my finance director and the accounting manager and say, okay, how do we tweak what we are doing? Because this is the pain that the client is feeling. How do we deliver our services in a way that helps them address that pain point? And then there may be some sales calls that I'm on with potential new clients because I've gotten really good at understanding the pain that a client or a potential client is feeling. And then it's, okay, how do we deliver or can we deliver value in a way that will help them? If not, they're not the right client for us. So it's like really spending a lot of my time on sales, marketing, and the overall vision of the firm and talent development of our staff.
What I got from that is that you are a great leader that's really leading your business forward, looking after your people, which is really, critical to our success as service providers. But if you had to sum it down, the people that are listening who want to be better leaders, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is like if you want to be a better leader, then you really have to lean into making the hard decisions and having the hard conversations. Because I think we are living in a time period where people want to avoid the hard conversations. They want to avoid the hard decisions. And I think leaders are the people who step up and lean into that. For example, when it comes down to having hard conversations, it's if you're looking at something and you see that someone is not meeting their deadlines or they're not meeting expectations, it's don't just let it go. It's like actually hop on a call and have a conversation with them. Understand what is going on and just being honest. Because there have been some times I've had to have calls with team members and say, hey, here's what I expect of you because I know you're capable of doing it. So let's understand what's stopping you from being able to deliver to these expectations and not shying away from those conversations, but real leaders will step in because, as I said, part of my goal is it that I didn't paint the picture clear for you? Or is this hey, we need to work on some performance, or maybe you lack the resources, or maybe you lack the clarity to be able to get there. And leaders will step in and have those tough conversations. And, another example of a tough conversation may be if you see that there is a client that the team is working on that it is really disruptive to have that client, whether that client's processes are just not aligned with how you run the firm, then maybe you need to have a tough conversation with a client and say, hey, we're not the right firm for you. And yes, it may hurt financially, but that's what leaders do. Leaders step up and say, all right, what is stopping us, whether it's internally or externally, from moving closer to the goals that we are headed to? And then if there's a tough conversation that needs to happen, a leader will step up and have it.
Great advice. Terrell, can you share something with us from a personal side that would give us a bit of insight into who you are as a person outside of the accounting world?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, growing up, I used to look at it as an unfortunate thing, but for me, it's more of I look at it now as a fortunate thing. Like I spent a ton of time in the hospitals, some of it for just being a wild, ambitious, little boy, just doing different stuff. And some of it was like I was born where one of my ear canals is smaller than the other. So where it's like my hearing is extremely impaired in one ear over the other. And I remember going like for years seeing different specialists about it, of like how to fix it and how to address it. And there's so much that I learned about, that situation. And in some respects, you can look at it and say, where there are other children who don't have this issue, they don't have to spend so much time at the doctor's office. Like, they can hear, more clearly than I can. They don't have this, the setback that I had to work through. Or even as a child, like wearing a hearing aid, like, in the, late 80s, early 90s wasn't as popular of a thing. And back then, they were not the, micro size hearing aids that they are today. Like, it was very obvious that you were different from all the other kids. And so I think living through that experience, really taught me, how to have compassion for other people and just the different things that they're going through. Because, for even now, most people, when they look at me, you can never tell that was, going on, or that was a situation. But I think for me, it just taught me to have way more compassion for people and really understanding where are people coming from. What is the experience? What is the journey that they've been on that brought them to this moment? And just really looking at it as an honor and a joy to be able to say that, hey, at some point, I am going to be a part of their journey. I need to make sure that the part I play in their journey, that it isn't one that discourages them. It isn't one that they look back on and say, I wish I would have never met that Terrell. And so I tend to take that perspective, and it's something that really shapes how I look at all the things that I do.
Well, that explains why you're such an amazing person. Difficult. You took positive out of a difficult situation, and every interaction I've ever had with you, you always come with it with kindness and compassion and empathy, and that's what makes you so special, Terrell.
Well, I really appreciate that, and thank you for reaching out. I think, like I said, when we met, because I find it to be so amazing of meeting so many people via social media, or through email, but when we get to see each other at the conferences, is being able to hang out and talk about different things and learn about what's going on with you, what you're excited about. So thank you for your friendship and for being willing to hang out when we're at these conferences.
Thank you, Terrell. On Protea Conversations, we like to end with some rapid fire to sort of get a look into your brain. I got 5 questions for you. Are you ready for it?
All right, let's go.
What would your death row meal be?
I would say Parmesan chicken. Yeah, Parmesan chicken would have to be it. Like, I'm a huge fan of it. Sometimes it gives me heartburn, but hey, at that point, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't. Do you prefer mountains or the ocean?
I would say mountains. I love the challenge.
You guys should check out Terrell likes to carry heavy weights up the side of mountains. So. What quality do you appreciate most in a good friend?
I would say honesty. Honesty is one that I really appreciate most.
Can you share with us a favorite book that you recommend everybody reads?
A favorite book? I would say How to Be a Capitalist with No Capital by Nathan Latka. That is a book I probably read like once a year because I think he does a really, really good job in that book of really helping you really understand the essence of being an entrepreneur and being innovative about solving problems and how you can approach that in any type of business or career endeavor.
Sounds like a good read. I'm going to have to add that to my Audible wish list. Last question. If you're stuck on a deserted island, what 3 items would you bring along?
All right. So if I'm stuck on a deserted island, I would say a really good book. And
with that, we end another Protea Conversations. Thank you for joining us in the journey of learning and inspiration. Today, we've gained insights from our guest and taken another step towards understanding the diverse tapestry of leadership in business and accounting. Remember, each conversation is a step towards positive transformation of business leaders. We hope our discussion has given you valuable takeaways to apply in your own career and life. Don't forget to subscribe to Protea Conversations on YouTube and Spotify so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and experiences, so connect with me on my social media channels. I'm most active on LinkedIn and would love for you to join the conversation. Join us next time for more engaging stories, advice, and conversations that matter. Until then, keep striving for excellence and embracing growth. Thank you for listening, be kind, and goodbye from Protea Conversations.